Hello and welcome to Practical Inclusion. And some of you who watch this so regularly will be like, oh my God, Bree's kind of on track. It hasn't been 2 months since the last one. And you are right. So I'll make sure I create a real big long gap between the next one. I don't want to create some kind of routine. Thank you for joining in today. From wherever you are. We've got an international guest today, so we'll probably have some international viewers as well. What we do first in Australia is actually acknowledge country. And so I'm situated on Wadawurrung country, which is country that was traditionally habited by the Wadawurrung people over what we believe to be more than 60,000 years. Before colonisation. And so in Australia, what we do at the beginning of meetings or events is we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're gathering on and pay our respects. So I pay respects to elders past and present, and I call out to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders or First Nations people across the world who are turning in today and recognise that this land is unceded land and always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I've got a guest that popped up on my LinkedIn feed recently. I was like, oh my God, I need to talk to her. And I was so excited that she said yes and agreed to come on. If you're watching today, you can absolutely put questions for the guest in the comment, whether it's on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube. And also, if you're watching the replay, feel free to do that as well, because we will get back to you and type away some answers if you have questions as you go. So really keen to get that engagement going. I'm going to do what I usually do, which is throw straight to the guests to get them to introduce themselves. Dr. Sheva Guy, are you happy to introduce yourself through story to the audience today?
Yes, thank you so much. And I just love that you do that at the beginning of all meetings. That's something that I want to start doing. So I think it's so crucial to have that acknowledgement and constantly have that in the forefront of our minds, because too frequently it just is something that, goes on the back burner, or we don't acknowledge it as much as we should. So I love that you do that. Hello, thank you for having me. I'm Dr. Sheva Guy. I go by Sheva. My pronouns are she, her. Some of you may know me as Dr. Bat, which was a funny thing that started when I kind of joined the LinkedIn world and fell into it, because my full name is Batsheva. So that's where the bat came from. That's where this bat comes from. And so my background, so I am in Cincinnati, Ohio, good old Midwest over here. And I was at the University of Cincinnati for a long time. I was in higher ed, got my undergrad, master's, doctoral degree there. And I started very doe-eyed freshman. I'm going to go pre-med. I'm going to be a doctor. And I grew up in a household where it was like doctor or lawyer, and those are your choices. So started out pre-med, and I grew up very sheltered. I went to a very small, very upper class, private school that was non-denominational. And I was always told growing up, you can do whatever you want to do as long as it's a doctor or a lawyer kind of thing. And when I got to college, it was this big new wide world where there were people different from me. And I started noticing these, and this is how I ended up in the equity and inclusion field, because I get that question how did you start? And the pivotal moment that I would always say is what led me to equity and inclusion in the first place is I was in an intro chemistry lab, and I was just, I fucking hated chemistry. I was like, well, if I cuss, am I cool to cuss? Am I allowed?
You're allowed, and I have a PhD in chemistry, so I just love this.
Okay. Am I allowed to cuss? Because okay, good. I told you before I hopped on, I did a radio show, and I wasn't allowed, and that was very hard. Very
hard. Yeah.
Intro chemistry was not my thing, but I remember it was mostly white guys. And at the time, I wasn't cognizant about race at all. I never would have described myself as a white woman. I would have described myself as a woman. That wasn't something that I grew up talked about. It was we don't talk about race. It's everybody is human. We respect people, blah, blah, blah. And it was the very colorblind ideology that I had growing up. But then, there were times when I was man, maybe this isn't as even as a child, this isn't quite as like we care about everybody in the same way kind of thing. But so yeah, I was in a group of all, it was probably all white men, and I'm sitting at this lab, whatever, and one of the guys goes, "Oh, we'll handle this. Just sit there and look pretty." And I was like, haha. And they were like, not haha, like, you're not touching, like, we're going to do it. And that was I was like, what? Like, I never was something that I just never experienced. And so that kind of, and I was still pre-med, and that moment just kind of sat with me. Ended up doing my doctoral studies, and I was studying women in STEM. But by that point, I had become very well versed, like the theories that I used in my dissertation were intersectionality theory, critical race theory, Black feminist thought. And what became women in STEM really became, how do we talk about opportunities for women in STEM, acknowledging that we're typically talking about white women in STEM, and that we have to talk about not only women of color in STEM, as talk about their specific needs and equity as it relates to that, but Black women in particular. And so that's what my dissertation was on. And I ended up doing a few, like working at University of Cincinnati, like a common thread to what I did was equity and inclusion work. COVID hit. I went from 0 to 3 kids in 3 months. So all of a sudden I have a biological daughter that was born December 2019. I have 2 sons that we were fostering that we've since adopted, 2 Black sons. COVID hit, George Floyd happens, and things really, and I wish that it didn't take that for me to fully embrace like anti-racism itself. But that it ended up being like, that's what it took. And it was a time with a lot of conflict, like within myself about what I wanted to do with my career. And so I was like, I'm going to do diversity and inclusion work and leave higher ed and just do diversity and inclusion work. Come to find very quickly that it is much of the work that we see, especially DEI offices that popped up after George Floyd, very performative, under-resourced, a lot of times used to say, oh, we're under-resourced, it didn't work, we don't need a DEI office anymore, like kind of like, haha, I told you so. And so I ended up in a role where I was a DEI consultant, and I ended up getting fired for having my pronouns in my email signature because they said we couldn't do that. So I was like yeah. And so it was a very stark realization that I was like, man, like I've really been like living under a rock here. Like I really did not, like I thought I knew a lot about DI, and I didn't. And so that's when and it's a long story short, that's when I posted to LinkedIn for the first time. And just being very vocal about authenticity in the workplace and what it means different things for me as a white woman than it means for other folks, as a white cis straight woman than it does for other folks. And redefining professionalism. How do we bring anti-racism in the workplace? How do we talk about anti-racism with our children as white people? And that's kind of how it all happened. And now I do change management consulting at a wonderful company, but I still talk a lot on LinkedIn about DEI, and that's what I do.
Thank you for sharing all of that. Like, what a history. And there's parts of that that you and I share in terms of science kind of background, moving into DI, particularly women in STEM. And I had that exact same pathway of it all being originally about white, straight, able-bodied women, and that realization that actually this is not DI work at all, and that we need to do more. Love what you've described. There's a burning question that I have deliberately kind of prompted, and there's probably a bunch of listeners thinking the same thing. I'm going to show this up first. This is what caught my eye from your LinkedIn, this incredible diagram that really articulates the difference between being anti-racist and not racist, which is in quotation marks there. So for those who can't visually see this diagram, I will post the original post with the written words after the show. But essentially it says anti-racist And there's 4 key things there, one being awareness, listening, education, and activism. And in the listening piece, it says leaning in and listening without centering your own experiences and whiteness. By this LinkedIn live show, 2 white folks talking about being anti-racist, are we doing this? How do we navigate this particular point? And it's something that sits with me all of the time, working in this space. Can you talk to that for us?
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you brought this up, because it was something that I think I reflect on a lot, and I think about it a lot. And really my answer is kind of twofold. On one hand, it is not my job to name myself as an ally or an anti-racist, right? So those descriptors come from doing the work and hearing that from others, not coming from myself. However, I think that there is something to be said about, not in terms of like, yeah, so I would say yes. I think that like me coming on here, and on one hand, like I'm obviously like probably will have like some more followers after this. Like I invited some of my friends to this. Like I'm the one that's like on the stage talking, right? So in that way, yes, 100% I am centering myself. But on the other hand, I try to be as intentional as possible. And I have another diagram similar to this where I did, because I actually, it was really stemmed from similar questions that I got and similar conversations that were sparked in my comments on LinkedIn. And so I had another diagram that says anti-racism versus saviorism, and how do we distinguish the two? And again, it's not for me to decide. Oh, yeah, you've got it. And so I think that one of the big things that I try to do is leverage my whiteness to center Blackness, and center Black voices, and doing that as much as possible. And then also acknowledging, and it's like sometimes, like I feel funny saying this, and it's hard for people to hear this and hard to say it sometimes, but white people are more likely to start subscribing to anti-racism if they hear it from a white person, unfortunately. But I can leverage my whiteness to do that. And if that's what I need to do to help make a difference, I will, as long as I'm not prioritizing my whiteness, my perspective, which is what I was doing before when I was at the very beginning of my DEI journey, where I was like, we're all women. And like, that's not like, and that's just the mindset it's not like, ignorance is not an excuse. I didn't know any better, but I actively tried to know better once like I had like some light bulb moments. And so I feel like I answered your question a very convoluted way, which is we don't get to decide that. Yes in one way and no in another.
Yeah. Look, I like the answer because it's an uncomfortable space, and I spent a lot of time even just thinking about having this conversation, between the two of us, and probably still get it wrong, right? But the thing that I keep doing and keep encouraging people to is that we need to be uncomfortable.
Yes.
And we have to be prepared to be called out and to get it wrong and to be provided advice on how we can perhaps do it better. We do have the privilege to get things wrong and it not be the end of the world. And we should lean into that. And so I love the way that you've answered that. And I also struggle in the same ways. And I really like the way on your LinkedIn post too that you always reference somebody who has influenced your ideas and your work in that space, and you send people there. And I like that as a way of directing people to actually listen to the voices that really matter in this space.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's exactly what it is about. Like, who am I centering in this conversation, and how am I framing the conversation? Like, for example, I have like because when I had made that anti-racism diagram, the one with the black background, I got like, I want that on a t-shirt. I want that on a t-shirt. I was like, okay, cool. I'll make t-shirts, but the money's not going to go to me. So all the money from any of my anti-racism products go to the reparations race. And I talk about that a lot on my, almost every anti-racism post I post, I'll reference that in the comments. Like if you want to buy some anti-racism swag, awesome. None of that money is going to me. All the proceeds are going to the, reparations race. Same as like, I've got some pro-choice stuff on there, and that's going to pro-choice organizations. So literally the only products where the money goes to me is like the ones that have the real just the real Dr. Beck guy on it. And I don't think anyone really wants that but my grandpa. So
you talked about this anti-racism versus saviorism diagram, and I can never pronounce that right. And in Australia, we put a U in it. My partner is actually from Ohio, so we're constantly talking about the different ways that we say things.
What are the odds?
What are the odds, right? But you've talked about some of these things already. For those who aren't visually seeing the diagram, the saviorism points are performative, harmful, prioritizing whiteness, and reinforces existing power dynamics rather than challenge them. I find this one of the more complex things to talk to people about in terms of power dynamics and how we do challenge power dynamics. I know it's probably a difficult question, but do you have specific examples of what that might look like for people?
Yeah, I do. And I think, and I will preface this by saying, I get a lot of comments on my posts that say, well, what about reverse racism? Like I'm discriminated against as a white man because da 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 or whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, racism, the definition of racism, a large component of it is it's discrimination, but it's power. Who holds the power? Where did the power come from? What are the building blocks of these institutions that we exist in? And when it comes to power, like one of the things I talk about a lot is what professionalism means. Like that word is tossed around a lot, like professional.
Mm-hmm.
And even me, even now today, knowing everything that I know, if you said, picture in your mind what professional looks like, the first thing I would picture, not say, but the first thing that would come to my mind is a white dude in a fucking suit. Legit. That's the first thing that would come to my mind because that has been ingrained in us. And if you really think back to historically, workplaces and, again, what they were built on and what power structures they were built on, they were built for and by affluent white men who dress a certain way. And now trying to fit. And now what happens is when we have a more diverse workforce where we've got Black people in our workforce, we have a global workforce, we have women in our workforce, we have people that are from all different religions, we have people that by choice are heavily tattooed, that want to wear things that make them comfortable and not things that feel like stifle their creativity, which can harm their work, right? But we're still kind of like fit into that neat box of wear a suit. I was trying to decide I was going on, it was my first time going on a client site for work. And I was like, what do I wear? And like my client was amazing and super chill and like probably didn't care what I wore, but I was like, it's my first time. What do I wear? And I was asking around and I saw there was this diagram of like, I don't even know what the fuck business casual is. There's this diagram of business casual. And I was like, I'm not wearing that. Like it was like a neutral color jacket. Like, why did we decide that? Why? And like, that's the question is why? And by forcing people to wear their hair a certain way, to dress a certain way, to speak a certain way, by trying to fit people into that mold of what that traditional professional looks like, that is holding power over them. That is not letting folks like come in with, and this isn't all workplaces, but it's very common, even in workplaces that try not to, that still it comes in, it creeps in because it is where institutions are built from. And that is a form of holding power. Like, you can't dye your, you can't dye your hair pink. Like you can't do that here. You have to dress this way. And that is putting people in a box and saying like, you are, I don't know how else to describe it. I'm going off on a tangent, but that's in general. I think that that's a really good example of power structures and how we control others.
I love the way that you put that into that specific place, and 100% agree. I was working with an organization just recently that said that that one of their inclusive initiatives was that they created a dress code. And the idea was that this dress code would somehow remove some of the challenges that particularly women in the workplace had been facing. And you read the dress code and it said, we expect when our employees are going to visit clients that they dress in a professional manner, and this will be determined by their manager. So,
like it's a million different, and like that's like I went to, like, my elementary school, I had to wear uniforms, and my sons, they don't go to they used to go to an elementary school where they had to wear uniforms. And I don't like, I think it is also, in my opinion, I think that is also a form of exerting power. And yeah, I don't like that. I don't like that.
Yeah, we noticed that difference because in Australia, pretty much all schools have uniforms.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I mean, I remember not having to worry about what I would had to wear, but like that was like not the point, right?
Yeah, exactly. And how do we govern that uniform in terms of how people do express themselves, and particularly for the queer community as well, to add to that list? It's a real live issue in terms of how we can be policed based on what we wear. Yeah. Wow, this conversation has just been so enlightening for me, let alone I imagine the listeners. Like, I'm learning so much. In Australia, the racism is just as prevalent, but we have this kind of mentality across the country that we are not racist, we are multicultural.
Yeah.
And
that erases people, because it takes, like, when we're like, typically in my posts, I'm specifically talking about Black Americans. I'm not saying that you shouldn't talk about anybody else, and nobody should talk about anybody else, but that is what I specifically talk about. And I extrapolate on why that is. But when we say like, oh, we're multicultural, that's erasing people. That's erasing specific cultures. That's not like the flex that you think it is, right? Which that, but I just like heard, I was like, oh God.
Yes, I love that. Is there any final points, stories that you want to share on the topic before we wrap up today?
I'm curious, like, I don't know if anybody has asked any questions. I don't know if you heard my feedback. I went into with noise feedback. So I went into LinkedIn Live to see if there were any comments, and it started playing. I was like, whoops. Oh no, like it started playing out loud. I was like, oopsie, didn't mean to do that. But I'm not sure. Like, I wish I could, I'll be able to see who is out there afterward. Just curious who tuned in. And if the people that I'm forced to be here, speaking of power, are here.
Well, no, we haven't had any come through yet, but they will absolutely come through after people absorb this content. Yeah, I'm very sure.
Yeah, but I think, I guess, if there aren't any questions, closing comments, let me think. One thing that, you had brought up at the very beginning about, is this centering ourselves? And I have a post coming up. I think it's and I really try not to pre-schedule too much content, but I created another graphic. And so when I do that, I usually do pre-schedule content. So I do have a post. I think it's coming sometime tomorrow or the next day. I just have the one. And it's about the different types of white people, and how there is a spectrum of are you anti-racist and actively trying to dismantle systems of power and privilege? Or are you kind of doing it in your head and liking posts, but not actually saying things out loud at Thanksgiving or whatever? Or are you doing it to seek validation from people of color? Do you see the cultures of people of color as a fun thing to do? And there's different, and I learned about it you'll see, I can't remember off the top of my head the man who actually created the list, but I have it tagged in the post and written in the graphic. But I just loved it. And so really, as you see the graphics I create, none of those are my original ideas. And that's why people can I credit you? Can I pay you? I'm take that money and donate it. Don't pay me. I didn't create the ideas. I'm just making them look pretty. So it catches people's eye and they see it. But I'll always say this is where I got it from. Yeah, it's my original, typical, sometimes it's like I word it in, like when a teacher says like do it in your own words, like sometimes I'll do it in my own words, but I'll still always say like I didn't come up with this idea. This isn't new. This might be new to you, but it's not new. But here's a way to package it and for you to see it and to start to understand it.
Yeah, I love that, and have absolutely been absorbing your content, and we'll look forward to that graphic, and have been going to follow the people that you're getting that inspiration from and that
Good.
from. So yeah, definitely working from that perspective.
Awesome.
Well, I want to say a huge thanks. I know it's evening your time, morning my time, but a huge thanks for coming on and sharing your thoughts and demonstrating your courage and your vulnerability to do that and to have this conversation. I think that the work that you're doing is amazing. If people want to hear a little bit more about me, I have to do my usual, like, what am I pumping this week? I'm also a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, and I'm looking for some coaching clients. So for people who are in the DEI space, or they're finding themselves on committees, pride networks, whatever it might be, you've got some kind of responsibility for driving DEI in your organization, I would love to coach you. So please, you can head over to the website. There's a landing page, coaching.breegorman.com, and you can see all the packages there. But please just message me on LinkedIn if you want to learn more, and I'll send you the stuff, and it would be great to work together. Sheva, anything else from you? People can find you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Connect with me, follow me, whatever. Send me a message. I'll try to respond. I have like an automatic message response that you'll see pop up to weed out the people that say like inappropriate things or that are just like pestering me to give them a job. But other than that, if you want to have a conversation, I'm there.
Awesome. Thank you so much again. And thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you so much. Take care.